language about them that Suella Braverman routinely uses. If you want people to integrate, if you want them to want to be part of our society and be proud to be part of our society, don't refer to them as criminals and invaders. It's that simple, isn't it? So I don't think Suella Braverman has got a leg to stand on here, but I do think the point she raises about multiculturalism and how well it is working today is a valid one. And it's not racist to question it, because if we want it to work, we've got to have an honest conversation about where it isn't. And that's the conversation I want to have with you. 0345 6060 973. Text me 84850. Tweet at LBC. Come to your calls on this in just a moment. A few lines still open if you want to call in now. But first, Nels Abbey, social commentator, author of Think Like a White Man, joins us. Nels, good to speak to you on the show tonight. Your response when you first heard Suella Braverman's comments today. Good evening.
Good evening. It's classic Suella Braverman, very, very loud, very, very righteous, also not righteous, but riotous. Also, if that's even the word, it's very loud, it's very brass, it's very crass, and limited, very, very limited on facts, but very, very high on emotion, and more likely to inflame than inform.
If we put aside her motives for 1 second, and
which I cannot do, by the way.
You can't divorce what she said from why she's saying it now. Tell me why.
No, I can't. I think that if Suella Braverman was a politician in any other country in the world, we as Britons, as British people who work in the media in particular, so would have no problem describing her politics. But because she is British, we almost whisper it. But the cat's out the bag at this stage. We are describing what's effectively a racist Home Secretary. That even, and when I say racist, I'm speaking in the most classic of terms possible. Nick Griffin, in his pomp, who was the head of the British National Party, was not as extreme in his rhetoric and was more considered and more calm than Suella Braverman has ever been. And it's very, very dangerous to a point right now where we must speak out about it. So the idea in which we can discuss this on an intellectual basis, which I'd love to do with you, Ben, also, and separate it from, say, Suella Braverman's motivation, which I think you've called correctly. Also, she's trying to appeal to she's pandering and dog whistling to a particular element of her own party.
But that doesn't mean she's necessarily wrong in what she said, Nels, does it? When she says multiculturalism right now has failed, I would say it's failing and it still can work. You disagree with that too?
Yeah, I disagree with it. I think multiculturalism has been a major success in Britain. Look, if people if people just arrive in a particular place and you don't know how to speak the language or so, it's a period of time you learn to actually speak the language, and we concentrate resources. As you pointed out, we should concentrate resources to actually help assist these people, not cut actual English language lessons and everything else, because again, it doesn't make those people as competitive as they would be in society. But nobody wants to come into this country and not actually speak the language. Nobody wants to come into a country and not feel like they're part of that country. Everybody wants to get in, get on and get up in the country that they're in. People don't come to this country because they want to fail, or because they don't want to, or because they just want to maintain everything that they previously were, and say in the old country, and not adopt some of the great things about this country.
For whatever reason, sorry to jump in, but for whatever reason, it's not happening in the level it should. A million people in this country don't speak English to a good standard. I mean, that's an astonishing.
Now, that is not a stationary figure. That is not, and has never been a stationary figure. My mom came here when she was 13 years old. My mother came here when she was 13 years old in the 60s. She came here from fair enough, my mom spoke English very, very well, but she spoke English in her own manner. She came here from the Niger Delta. And if you speak to my mom today or so, of course, however many decades later, but very, very quickly or so, the people blend in, they get in, they try and understand things, they pick up language, they pick up skills, and they start to contribute to society. The idea that, look, a million people don't speak English right now, so is a situation that we're in right now. It doesn't mean that these things can't be improved upon, or these people are stationary or never improve or never get. I agree, but
we can both say right now that is a problem that needs addressing. Suella Braverman might blame those people and suggest they just don't make any effort. I disagree with that, but I would also still say that if you live in a country and you don't speak English, that is going to be a problem.
Yeah, I agree, and I would also say the same thing that if you're Brit living in Spain or so, and you don't speak Spanish, or so, that's also a problem. Yeah. But the thing about it is that, Brits who move to Spain, they go there and eventually they learn Spanish and they learn it literally. I want to order a beer, I want to order some chips, I want to order something. The same thing as people who move into this country from countries that don't speak in English, which is actually quite rare, actually, when you think about it. Most people who come to this country are coming from countries where English is almost naturally their first language. If you're looking at the big communities in Britain, you're looking at the Nigerians, the Ghanaians, the Indians, the Pakistanis, the Bangladeshis, so on and so forth, the really established big communities, they're all coming from countries where English is their first language.
That hasn't always been the case over the last 20 years, of course. You know, there was a big influx of people from Eastern Europe, for example, if we're going back that far. But Nels, what about my point about...
I must say, Ben, Eastern European integration in this country has been a blessing. And most of them actually, a lot of them left the country. The house I'm sitting in right now, I purchased it from a man from Eastern Europe. He was a builder. He built a beautiful palace that I currently live in right now. He left this country after Brexit because of the xenophobic wave that he actually experienced. He went back to his country. But the key thing about it is that we must be clear that the immigration from Eastern Europe, the new millennial immigration from Eastern Europe into Britain, has been a blessing. The gentleman who just finished doing my kitchen is from Kosovo. But the person he was working with was from Bulgaria. This is this is a good thing for us.
There's a difference there, isn't there, between immigration and multiculturalism. There's a difference there. Multiculturalism, of course, much more about the absence, as Suella Braverman put it, or the success or otherwise of integration. Do you think there is enough integration, Nels, when people do come to the UK? Do you think they integrate enough to say multiculturalism is working?
It's one of the most beautiful things I see is that when you see somebody who's recently moved to this country, one of the first things you start to see is that they try and mimic a British accent. They're trying to blend in. They pick up the local regional accents. If they live in somewhere like South London or so, or wherever, or East London or Essex somewhere, you start to hear this person saying, like, all right, mate, and everything else in their own language, in their own tongue, because they're just trying to get on. They're trying to actually not just learn the language, but learn the mannerisms and try and actually blend in. And that's everything I have seen. And I've seen the pain to which people go to actually make sure that they don't stick out.
So the point I made about different communities living side by side but rarely mixing, you don't think that happens now, so you don't see there's a problem?
I think it does happen in some situations, but I'll introduce yourself and your readers to something that we haven't discussed in this conversation called white flight. So, for example, I live in a place in North London, a borough called Haringey. It is, when you're looking at education segregation or so in Britain, this was a report done around 2015 or so, I believe. They looked at the most segregated boroughs for education, where there was literally one school you'd have all black and Asian and minority ethnic children, another school you'd have white children. So every single area where that was taking place was in the North and in the Midlands, except one place, one borough, only one borough in London where that was taking place. And it was taking place in a borough called Haringey. And what we experienced in Haringey also was particularly around the turn of the millennium, we experienced a huge amount of white flight out of one half of the borough into the other half of the borough, to the point right now where we have a borough of two halves. One half of the borough diverse, economically challenged, the other half of the borough wealthy and white.
And I'd say that's a sign of multiculturalism failing. We can argue about why that is, but I'd say that's a failure of multiculturalism.
I wouldn't say it's a failure of multiculturalism or so, because that's actually placing the point of the fingers at the
It's not blaming either side. It's not blaming either party. It's just saying now that's not a healthy situation in the borough of Haringey.
No, it's not. It's not as healthy a situation as it could be, because again, all the children don't learn from each other as they should do. They don't blend into each other as much as they potentially should do,
or as they would if multiculturalism was working.
But what we're seeing, you're right. But again, so if you're talking about the incoming cultures, if you want to use that term, multiculture, and I must be clear, the difference between multiculturalism and multiracialism also are very, very minor. So these terms are often synonyms for each other. In practice, they are synonyms for each other, certainly. But what we're seeing is that the cultures or the races of people that are coming in, once they move in or so, you get white people effectively with money, they just move out of the area. Effectively, there's not much those people can do in that situation. If white flight is going to happen, then it's going to happen. That's just the nature of economics. And the people who are coming into these countries, into Britain, for example, are likely to be poorer, less established, and therefore can't just move along with them. And that's part of the purpose of it. But I think the key thing for all of us here is that, yes, the idea that multiculturalism has failed, I must be clear, when you look at commerce, we look at cuisine, we look at our sport, we're doing much better in sport than we've ever done also right now. Yeah. We look at every element across Britain that you could potentially think of. When we look at our cities and towns and everywhere else, the places that actually have more multiracialism, more multiculturalism, are more successful in Britain today. And I think that actually speaks to the value and the brilliance and beauty of multiculturalism, as opposed to the places where you look at where it's predominantly, where there's not much multiculturalism, there's not much multiracialism, or so. You got the old school homogeneity in places that I grew up in. But they're not gaining the advantage of multiculturalism, and they're poorer as a result.
I hear you, Nels. A really interesting conversation. A lot of truth said there, I think. Nels, thank you for your time. Nels Abbey, social commentator, author of Think Like a White Man, a satirical book on being black in Western societies. Interesting. I wonder what you made of that. Do you